The empty vial hit the floor with a sound like breaking glass, and Queen Vivian's world shattered with it. Her husband lay unconscious in their marriage bed, drugged into oblivion rather than touch her. 7 years. 7 years of walking to his chambers with hope fluttering in her chest like a caged bird, and this was the truth. He'd rather poison himself than be awake when she arrived. Her hand trembled as she picked up the sleeping draft, the bitter scent confirming what her heart already knew. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't duty. This was rejection so profound he'd rendered himself unconscious to avoid her presence. Why? The word escaped as barely a whisper. Behind her, the door she'd closed so carefully stood as a barrier between her and the life she thought she'd been building. Ahead, her husband's chest rose and fell in the deep rhythm of artificial sleep, and somewhere in the space between, her last shred of hope died. What do you do when you discover your husband would rather drug himself than fulfill the one duty that could give you the child you've dreamed of for 7 years? Welcome back to the channel, my dear friends. Before we dive deeper into the story, kindly click subscribe. Like this video and tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. Your support helps me bring you more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. 3 hours earlier, Vivian Ashford stood before the full-length mirror in her chambers, watching her lady's maid adjust the ivory silk of her nightgown. The fabric whispered against her skin like a ghost, appropriate, since that's what she felt like most days. A ghost in her own marriage. "You look beautiful, Your Majesty," the maid said softly, her voice thick with the kind of pity Vivian had learned to ignore. "Tonight will be different. I can feel it." Vivian's reflection stared back with eyes that had learned not to hope. 26 years old, and she looked like a woman who'd lived twice that in disappointment. 7 years of this monthly ritual. 7 years of walking to her husband's chambers with her heart fluttering, only to return at dawn with that same heart a little more bruised. "Yes," she murmured, forcing her lips into something resembling a smile. "Perhaps it will be." What else could she say? That she'd stopped believing in different somewhere around the 3rd year of their marriage? The door burst open without warning. Her sister Isla swept in carrying a small vial of amber liquid, her dark curls wild around her face, eyes flashing with that familiar fierce protectiveness that had defined her since childhood. Where Vivian had inherited their mother's golden hair and quiet composure, Isla was all fire and opinions she never bothered to contain. "I brought you something," Isla announced, holding up the vial like a trophy. "It's a fertility tonic from the Southern Covens. Guaranteed to." "Isla." Vivian sighed, cutting her off. "I don't need. You've been trying for 7 years, Viv. 7 years. Isla's voice cracked slightly. "The court whispers. They say you're—" "I know what they say." Vivian interrupted more firmly this time, turning from the mirror to face her sister directly. She'd heard it all. In corridors, in pitying glances, in the way conversations died when she entered rooms where noble ladies gathered with their children. The Barren Queen. That's what they called her when they thought she couldn't hear. And why wouldn't they? After 7 years, she hadn't yet given the kingdom an heir. She watched those other women sometimes, the way they cradled their babies, the casual ease with which they adjusted a blanket or soothed a cry. Such simple gestures that looked like magic to her, an impossible, forbidden gift she'd never receive. "Then let me help you prove them wrong." Isla squeezed her hand, her grip almost painful in its intensity. "Please. You'd be such a wonderful mother. I see how you are with the children in the village, the way you—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than intended. Vivian softened her voice, seeing the hurt flash across Isla's face. "Thank you. But no amount of fertility magic could fix a marriage that had never been consummated." The problem wasn't her womb. It was the 10 feet of careful distance her husband maintained between them at all times. But she couldn't say that. Couldn't admit that she remained as untouched by King Nathaniel as the day she'd wed him. The shame of it, the confusion, the hurt, it was a private ache she'd learned to carry alone, for the sake of their reputation, the kingdom. "Thank you," she said finally, tucking the vial away in a drawer she knew she'd never open. "I appreciate the thought." A soft knock interrupted them. Another maid appeared in the doorway, head bowed. "It's time, Your Majesty." Vivian stood, squaring her shoulders. 7 years had taught her many things, but perhaps the most valuable was this. Dignity could be worn like armor, and if she wore it well enough, maybe no one would see the wounds beneath. The walk to the king's chambers felt longer each month. Through the portrait gallery, where the eyes of Nathaniel's ancestors seemed to follow her with judgment. Past the great windows where moonlight spilled through in silver pools. And worst of all, past the nursery that remained cruelly empty. Tonight she paused in that doorway longer than usual, her hand pressed against the frame. She let herself imagine it, just for a moment. The room filled with life. A crib by the window. Tiny clothes folded in the wardrobe. The sound of a baby's laugh echoing off these walls that had known only silence. Her hand drifted to her flat stomach. What if tonight was different? What if her husband was waiting? What if he looked at her, really looked at her, and finally reached for her the way a husband should reach for his wife? What if tonight was the night she finally became a mother? She crushed the thought before it could take root. Hope was a dangerous thing. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. She'd been 19 when they married, terrified and foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. When Nathaniel had taken her hand during the ceremony, for one breathless moment, she'd felt something, a pull, a recognition, something that whispered, "Mate," with such certainty she'd nearly wept. Then he'd released her hand and escorted her to her chambers. "Our marriage serves its purpose," he'd said, his voice cold enough to frost the air between them. "The alliance is secured. That is enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for the kingdom that needed an heir. Not for the wedding contract that stipulated they'd try. Not for her heart, which had somehow decided to want impossible things. A husband who looked at her like she mattered, and a child to love with every piece of herself. And so, as per the marriage agreement, once a month she would come to his chambers. Once a month they would try. Except they never did. Vivian reached Nathaniel's chambers and paused, her palm pressed flat against the heavy oak door. Behind this door lay her husband. The thought had her wolf, that primal part of every shifter, stirring beneath her skin, whining softly with longing. Tonight would be no different. She knew that. And yet something close to hope beat its wings dangerously against her ribs. Not hope for his love. She'd buried that dream long ago. But hope for a child that she couldn't let go of. Vivian opened the door. The king's chambers were dark except for dying embers in the fireplace. Heavy curtains blocked the moonlight, casting everything in shades of shadow that seemed to press in from all sides. "Your Majesty?" Her voice came out softer than intended, almost tentative. Silence. But not the heavy silence of emptiness. Someone was here. She could feel it, an awareness that prickled along her skin, raising goosebumps on her arms. Whenever Nathaniel was near, her body knew. Her wolf knew. Her bare feet whispered across thick carpets as she moved deeper into the room. She could make out the massive four-poster bed against the far wall, its curtains drawn. With each step, her wolf stirred more insistently, and her husband's scent wrapped around her like a physical touch, wild and clean and utterly male, filling her lungs until she felt lightheaded. Her wolf whined, a sound of longing that made her chest physically ache. She shouldn't want him. 7 years of rejection should have killed whatever foolish thing lived in her chest. But God's help her, she did. She wanted him with an intensity that terrified her. Her pace quickened despite herself. Maybe tonight. Maybe this time. Her hands trembled as she reached the bed. She could hear breathing now, deep and even. "Please," she thought desperately. "Please just let this work. I don't need you to love me. I just need..." Vivian drew back the curtain. Nathaniel lay on his back, chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of sleep. Moonlight filtering through a gap in the curtains painted him in silver and shadow. The hard planes of his face, the dark sweep of his lashes, the strong column of his throat. Even deep in sleep, he looked like a king, powerful, untouchable, hers in name only. "Nathaniel." She spoke louder this time, leaning over him. "Nathaniel, I'm here." Nothing. Not even a flutter of his eyelids. Vivian swallowed against the hurt rising in her throat. Maybe he was simply exhausted. The council meetings had run late recently. Maybe. Her foot struck something on the floor. She looked down and saw a small glass vial lying on its side by the bed. Empty. Vivian frowned and bent slowly, bringing it to her nose. Then she froze. The scent was unmistakable. Valerian root, poppy extract, nightshade in careful measure. She stared at the empty vial, then at her husband's too still form. Understanding crashed over her like ice water, stealing her breath, making her stagger back a step. This was a sleeping draft. A strong one. He'd drugged himself. Her husband had drugged himself rather than be awake when she arrived. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it, broken and small in the darkness. Vivian gripped his shoulder and shook hard, harder than she'd ever dared touch him. "Nathaniel, wake up. Wake up." His head lolled slightly, but his eyes remained closed. Whatever he'd taken, it had pulled him deep under, far beyond her reach. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking with a rage she didn't know she possessed. "I'm your wife. I'm your wife, and you drug yourself unconscious rather than..." Her voice broke. She stared at his sleeping face, at this man who would rather render himself insensible than spend an hour in her presence. "I don't need your love," she said softer now, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I know what this marriage is. I know it's duty, alliance, nothing more. Most queens don't get even what I have. You listen to my counsel. You let me rule beside you. You're never cruel." Her hand tightened on the vial until the glass bit into her palm. "I can live with distance. I can live with separate chambers and formal addresses, and you looking through me like I'm made of glass." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "But a child, Nathaniel. Just give me a child." Her voice cracked completely. "I don't care if we spend the rest of our lives in separate towers, but let me be a mother. Let me hold our baby in my arms. Let me." She pressed her free hand to her chest, where an ache had lived for 7 years, growing a little deeper each month. But he couldn't hear her. He'd made sure of that. Vivian sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs no longer able to support her weight. The empty vial sat on the bedside table like an accusation, catching the dim light. Why go to such extremes? If he truly found her so unbearable, why not simply refuse outright? Was the mere knowledge of her presence really so unpleasant that he had to obliterate his own consciousness? She wiped away the single tear she'd allowed herself. That was enough weakness for one night. Protocol required she spend the night. Servants would notice if she returned to her chambers too quickly, and the court gossips would have fresh ammunition. So she would do what she always did, play her part perfectly, even if the stage was empty. Vivian climbed into the bed, keeping to her side, maintaining the careful distance that had defined their marriage. The mattress dipped under her weight, and for one heart-stopping second, Nathaniel shifted, his unconscious body rolling slightly in her direction. She couldn't stop herself from looking at him. The harsh angles of his face softened in sleep, the vulnerable curve of his mouth. His hand moved slowly, as if pulled by instinct deeper than thought, his fingers stretching across the sheets. Vivian's breath caught as his palm found her hand, his fingers curling around hers. Warm, calloused, real. Her heart lurched so violently it hurt. This small thing, his hand around hers, shouldn't mean everything. It should make her want to weep with relief and joy and devastating loneliness all at once. And yet it did. This was what she'd been reduced to. A queen so starved for her husband's touch that his unconscious hand finding hers in the dark felt like a gift from the gods themselves. But it wasn't a gift. It was an accident. A reflex. Nothing more. Vivian pulled her hand free and turned away, curling on her side, her back to him. Her husband was never cruel, never dismissive. He was fair, just protective of their people. He consulted her on matters of state, valued her input on everything from trade agreements to military strategy. He simply didn't want her as a wife. And she'd made peace with that.
Truly, she had.
She could live without his love.
She'd learned how.
But living without a child? Her hand drifted to her stomach, flat and empty as it had been for 7 years. She imagined, not for the first time, what it would feel like. The flutter of life growing inside her. Tiny fingers curling around hers with trust and need and love so simple it didn't require distance or careful protocols. Tomorrow she would wake and perform her duties with grace and dignity. She would smile at the courtiers and make decisions that affected thousands of lives, and no one would know that inside she was breaking. But tonight, she let herself mourn. Not for the marriage she'd never have, but for the children she might never hold. For all that love trapped inside her with nowhere to go. Beside her, Nathaniel slept on, drugged into oblivion, his hand still reaching across the empty space where hers had been. 3 weeks later, the ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels, filled with music and laughter that pressed against Vivian's skull like a physical weight. She sat at the high table, spine straight, smile fixed in place, the perfect picture of a contented queen. Below, her husband was twirling Princess Lorelei of the Western Isles through a waltz with effortless grace. Had been for the past 15 minutes, in fact. Vivian watched them turn and spin, Nathaniel's hand at the princess's waist, and something ugly twisted in her chest. Not jealousy, exactly. Something worse. Something closer to resignation. In 7 years of marriage, Nathaniel had never once asked his own wife to dance. Not just tonight, ever. He would dance with visiting dignitaries, with noble women whose favor mattered politically, but never with Vivian. "Isn't Princess Lorelei lovely?" someone whispered to her right. Vivian's spine stiffened, but she kept her expression neutral, her gaze forward. "Well, she's certainly fertile," another voice responded with barely concealed glee. "3 children already, and she's only 24. Perhaps His Majesty is considering." After 7 years with no heir, a duchess cut in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Can you blame him?" Vivian's fingers trembled as she reached for her wine glass. She took a careful sip, letting the bitter liquid burn down her throat, focusing on that small pain instead of the larger one blooming in her chest. On the dance floor, Nathaniel bowed to Princess Lorelei, who curtsied with a dazzling smile. For a moment, Vivian thought, hoped, he might return to the high table. His chair beside her had sat empty for over an hour now. Instead, Lady Melisande appeared at his elbow, and Nathaniel nodded with that same courteous distance before leading her into another dance. "Of course. Your Majesty?" Vivian turned to find a man bowing before her, tall, fair-haired with warm brown eyes and a kind smile that actually reached those eyes. Something about him felt genuine in a way that was rare at court. "Ambassador Kieran," he supplied when she hesitated, "of the Eastern Territories." "Of course." Vivian forced brightness into her voice, scrambling to place him. "Forgive me, it's been a busy evening." "No forgiveness necessary." His eyes held genuine warmth. "I've been meaning to speak with Her Majesty about a certain point blocking the trade agreement between our kingdoms." Vivian nodded. There had been contentions with the signing of the treaty, disagreements over tariffs and border access that had stalled negotiations for months. "I'm listening." "I wonder," he said, glancing toward the floor where Nathaniel was spinning Lady Melisande through another turn, "if Your Majesty might honor me with a dance while we discuss it? It seems a crime that you should sit alone while the festivities continue." Heat flushed Vivian's cheeks. He was offering her an escape, she realized. A way to show the court that even if her husband wouldn't dance with her, someone would. She hesitated, aware of how it might look. But what did it matter? People were already talking. They'd been talking for 7 years. "All right," she said, rising from her chair with as much grace as she could muster. "Lead the way." Kieran's smile widened. He offered his hand, and she took it. She was aware of eyes following them as he led her onto the dance floor, felt the weight of dozens of gazes, heard the whispers spreading like wildfire. But Kieran's hand was steady at her back, and she hadn't danced in so long. Gods, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to move like this, to feel music in her bones. Her Majesty is very graceful, Kieran said as they turned. You're kind to say so, Vivian replied carefully, but I'm well aware you're simply being polite. She didn't need his pity in the form of excessive flattery. Then something in the air changed. The temperature, the light, the very weight of it all. It was subtle at first, a prickle at the base of her neck, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Hunted. Her next inhale caught halfway in her throat. She found him immediately. Nathaniel stood across the hall amidst a sea of silks and gold, no longer dancing, his gaze locked on hers with an intensity that made her skin burn. She'd never seen him look at her like that. Not once in 7 years. Vivian raised her chin slightly, held his gaze for a deliberate beat longer than necessary. Yes, her look said, some people don't find it so horrible being near me.
Surprised?
Then Kieran spun her away, and the connection broke. But she still felt him, Nathaniel's gaze burning between her shoulder blades, scorching hot, unrelenting. I'm sorry for what they say, Kieran observed quietly. All those whispers about you. Vivian's pulse jumped. The air was thicker now, laced with tension and something else. Nathaniel's scent, stronger than it should be from this distance, making it hard to focus. Whispers. She raised a brow, keeping her tone light. It's not a queen's place to worry about whispers, Ambassador. Forgive me, Your Highness. He bowed his head slightly, chastened. Then he softened his tone. I just can't bear hearing someone who's been as helpful and attentive to my people's needs be the subject of such baseless cruelty. Vivian gave him a brief smile, acknowledging the apology. At the edge of the dance floor, Nathaniel had stopped moving entirely. Something focused and dangerous in the way he was watching them now, like a wolf that had just spotted prey. I'm most grateful, Kieran said, leaning closer so his words brushed against her ear, for Her Majesty's kindness and diligence. Vivian's head snapped back toward him. My diligence, Ambassador, she said firmly, stems from the duty I bear to protect my people's best interests. It was no personal favor toward you. To her surprise, he smiled. Of course, he murmured. As they moved through the waltz, Vivian became hyper-aware of everything. The whispers spreading through the crowd like poison. The heat of bodies and candles making the room feel stifling. But above all, him. Nathaniel. Every turn brought him back into view, and with each turn, Vivian's breath shortened. He'd moved closer to the dance floor now, prowling along its edge like a predator circling. Forgive me for saying so, Your Majesty, Kieran said quietly, but the court is unkind to you. Vivian stiffened, though she didn't take her eyes off Nathaniel. I don't know what you mean. Please. He paused. You seem alone, even in a room full of people. Another turn and Nathaniel was there again, closer this time. His silver eyes had gone cold, sharp, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. She swallowed hard. Your husband doesn't dance with you, Kieran continued, as if he hadn't noticed the dangerous shift in the room's energy. Doesn't sit with you. I've watched him all evening, and he barely looks at you. He's busy, she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. Nathaniel's nostrils flared slightly. His eyes, gods, his eyes had darkened to steel. Ambassador, Vivian began, thinking of interrupting their dance, of stopping this before. Do you know what I think? Kieran pulled her infinitesimally closer. I think the whispers are wrong. I think the fault lies not with you. His Majesty and I have an arrangement, Vivian said stiffly. If you'll excuse me, I think we should. Forgive me, Kieran interrupted, though he didn't sound sorry. It's just that I see a woman wasting away in a marriage that gives her nothing. Vivian tried to pull back, but his grip tightened slightly. Ambassador, I think we should finish this dance without further inappropriate conversation. Of course. His smile didn't fade. I just wonder if you really find it inappropriate, or if perhaps you're just not used to someone speaking honestly to you. But Vivian was barely listening. In 7 years, she had never seen Nathaniel lose control. Not once. He was always measured, always composed, always perfectly, maddeningly in command of himself. Now he looked like he was seconds away from shifting into his wolf form in the middle of the ballroom. "I think," she said quietly, urgently, "we should stop." "You know," Kieran continued as if she hadn't spoken, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, "there are ways to address your situation. Discreetly." Vivian's steps faltered. "Excuse me? A woman like you, young, healthy, clearly not the problem." His thumb traced a small circle at her waist. "You have options. If your husband cannot or will not give you what you need." The world seemed to slow, every sound muffled except for the pounding of her heart. Kieran's next words were barely a whisper. "I have rooms here in the castle. No one would need to know. And perhaps in a few months, the court would finally have something to celebrate besides gossip." The temptation that ripped through Vivian was so fierce it stole her breath. He was offering himself. Offering to give her what Nathaniel wouldn't, a child. A hand clamped down on Kieran's shoulder. The grip was so tight his face went white, all blood draining in an instant. "Ambassador." Nathaniel's voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly courteous, but his jaw was locked so tight it looked painful. And his eyes gold. Pure, burning gold. "I need a word. Now." The entire ballroom had gone quiet. Even the music had faltered, trailing off into uncertain silence as every eye turned toward them. "Your Majesty," Vivian said, keeping her face calm even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She stepped between the two men. "Perhaps we could." "Not now, Vivian." Her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Her name. He'd used her name. In 7 years of marriage, he'd called her by her name maybe twice and never in public. She stared at him, at this man who was her husband, but looked like a stranger. This wasn't the cold, controlled king she knew. His gaze raked over her, possessive, hungry, wild, and for one impossible moment, the rest of the ballroom ceased to exist. There was only him, looking at her like she belonged to him. The intensity of it stole her breath. "Your Majesty," Kieran protested weakly as Nathaniel began leading him toward the door, his grip still iron-tight on the ambassador's shoulder. "Please, I meant no disrespect." I said move.
People were staring now.
Conversation had died completely, ripples spreading outward from where Vivian stood alone in the middle of the dance floor, her husband dragging a foreign ambassador away like a common criminal. Then they disappeared through the doorway, and the whisper started. Vivian stood perfectly still, heart racing, skin flushed, unable to process what had just happened. In 7 years, Nathaniel had never looked at her like that, never touched her like that, never acknowledged her as his in front of anyone. What had just changed? Vivian's chambers had never felt smaller. She paced from the window to the door and back again, her evening gown swishing with each agitated turn, the sound grating against her already frayed nerves. What had just happened? Where was Nathaniel? What had he done to the ambassador? She'd sent 3 different servants with orders to bring word of Nathaniel, of Ambassador Kieran, of anything. The not knowing was torture. The way Nathaniel had looked at her in the ballroom, in 7 years, she'd never seen him like that. Never seen that wild, possessive hunger in his eyes. Never felt his attention on her like a physical brand. The door burst open without warning. Vivian, Isla swept in without knocking, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. "Oh my gods, Viv.
Did you see him?"
Vivian turned from the window, stomach sinking. "What happened? Where is—" "He was practically feral," Isla interrupted, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. "I've never seen anything like it. The way he looked at that ambassador, I thought he was going to rip the man's throat out right there in front of everyone." "I don't see why you're so excited," Vivian said tightly, wrapping her arms around herself. "He caused a scene in front of the entire court. This could create a diplomatic crisis with the Eastern Territories." "Oh, Viv." Isla laughed, actually laughed. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" He was jealous. Isla crossed the room and grabbed Vivian's hands. "Magnificently jealous. Which means, oh, Viv, you're pregnant. You have to be." Vivian stopped mid-breath. "I'm sorry, what?" It all makes sense, Isla exclaimed, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. Alphas become incredibly possessive when their mate is carrying their child. It's instinct, primal, uncontrollable, and the way he practically murdered that poor ambassador. Gods. Vivian pressed a hand to her forehead. Isla, this isn't funny. Do you understand the political implications? The Eastern Territories could take this as an act of aggression. We could be looking at. But we're not, Isla said confidently. Not once they know you're pregnant. It's perfectly natural for an alpha to be aggressive when his mate is expecting. Everyone will understand. I'm not pregnant, Vivian said flatly. Of course you are. Isla's smile didn't waver. You must be. Why else would he react like that? Sister. Vivian's voice was exhausted. I know I'm not because Nathaniel and I never. We didn't. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Isla frowned, confusion creasing her brow. What do you mean? I saw you leave for his chambers 3 weeks ago. I was there when? I was there, Vivian said quietly, but nothing happened. The frown deepened. So, you're not pregnant because you didn't that night? But you have before, right? Her eyes searched Vivian's face. I mean, not this time, but in the past 7 years, surely. No. The single word fell between them, like a stone into still water. Vivian. Isla's voice had gone very careful, very quiet. You have at some point consummated your marriage, right? No, Vivian repeated. Never. Isla's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But that's impossible. You've been married for 7 years. I'm aware. This isn't. Isla sank onto the edge of Vivian's bed, her face pale. Viv, do you understand how dangerous this is? For you? For our family? The marriage could be declared invalid. You could be. I know. Vivian's voice was hollow. Isla was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she stood abruptly and began pacing. But why? Even if he doesn't particularly like you, I can't believe the king would be so disgusted that he couldn't fulfill his obligations. She turned to face Vivian. An heir isn't just about desire, it's about duty. And Nathaniel is nothing if not dutiful. He needs an heir as much as you do, maybe more. There has to be a reason he's... A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Then the door flew open, and Nathaniel filled the doorway. He looked wrong. His jacket was gone, his shirt partially unlaced, his chest heaving with harsh breaths. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes that were usually so controlled, burned with something wild and desperate. Vivian watched him step into the room, his movements prowling, predatory. This wasn't the careful, measured king she'd observed for 7 years. This was a hunter, a wolf barely contained in human skin. Out, he said, his voice low and rough. Isla's eyes went wide. She glanced at Vivian. Viv, I don't think. I said out. The word came out on a growl that made Isla flinch. Isla, it's fine, Vivian managed, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own voice. Go. Isla hesitated one more moment, then hurried from the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Nathaniel's gaze fixed on Vivian with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to put distance between them, but she lifted her chin instead, forcing herself to meet those burning eyes. What happened earlier? She asked, proud when her voice came out steady. I hope you came to explain yourself. Nathaniel didn't answer. He just kept staring at her, his nostrils flaring slightly. Scenting her. What's wrong? She pressed. You're not acting like yourself. Like myself? His laugh was harsh, bitter. He took another step forward. You want me to act like myself? Yes, she said, holding her ground even as her wolf whined low in her chest, responding to the raw power radiating off him. You assaulted a foreign ambassador in the middle of a state function. This isn't like you, Nathaniel. You're. His scent hit her then, really hit her, and she paused mid-sentence. It was wild, untamed, mixed with something that made her wolf surge forward with desperate need. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her voice came out too breathless. The Eastern Territories could take this as an act of aggression. We could be looking at what I've done. Nathaniel snapped, affronted. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. What I've done. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was propositioning you. I heard him. Every word he whispered in your ear. Vivian's breath caught. So, what if he was? I can handle inappropriate advances. Handle it. Nathaniel's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. You were considering his offer. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation.
And it was true.
For one desperate, shameful moment, she had considered it. I've handled advances before, she forced out. I don't need you to suddenly decide to. Suddenly, he was there, closing the distance in 2 powerful strides that had her stumbling backward until her back hit the stone wall. His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, and she growled in protest, her wolf responding to the challenge with aggression. You're saying there have been others? He stopped, his jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. How many? It doesn't matter, she snapped back. Ladies proposition you all the time. I've seen them. That woman at the winter solstice ball practically. I've never been unfaithful. The words cut through her tirade like a knife. The wounded look he gave her stole the breath from her lungs. Not once, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. I made vows to you, Vivian. I've honored them. The fight drained out of her, because it was true. She'd watched him for 7 years, watched women throw themselves at him. Beautiful women, powerful women, women who could give him everything she couldn't, and he'd always been distant. Polite, but unreachable. Just like he was with her. I know, she said, softer now. I know you haven't. Something in his expression cracked. He looked hurt, genuinely hurt, and she realized with a start that her words had wounded him. Then why, he asked. Why were you considering his offer? I wasn't. She stopped because that was a lie. I don't care about that man. I don't want him. I want a baby. I want to be a mother. That's all I've ever wanted, and Vivian, he started, but she couldn't stop now. You have to understand, she cried out. Every month I walk past that empty nursery. Every month I hope that maybe this time you'll... She choked on the words, unable to finish. But you never do. You're never even awake. Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Then, barely a whisper. I warned you. Vivian looked up to find Nathaniel staring at her with something that looked like agony in his eyes. Before we married, he continued, his voice hollow, I told you I would never claim you, never touch you, that this would be a marriage on paper only. You agreed. I was 19, Vivian cried. My kingdom needed this alliance. I didn't have a choice. She swallowed hard. But I thought that maybe you'd change your mind. I didn't know what it would feel like to watch you from afar, to want you and know you. I'm trying to protect you. The words exploded out of him like they'd been held back by force for too long. Nathaniel's hands came up to grip her shoulders, not hard, but firmly enough that she couldn't look away. You don't understand, Vivian. If I touch you, if I claim you... He stopped, breathing hard. What? She whispered. What happens if you touch me? But he just shook his head, his eyes squeezing shut. One day, he said finally roughly.
Soon.
I promise you. Soon you'll have your child. Her breath caught in her throat. Surely, she hadn't heard right. What? She grabbed onto his arms. What did you just say? Soon, he repeated, opening his eyes to look at her. Just not yet. There are things I need to arrange first. But I promise you, Vivian, you will be a mother. Hope, dangerous, painful hope, bloomed in her chest like a flower pushing through concrete. Do you mean it? He nodded once, and it was enough. The happiness that flooded through her was so intense it hurt. She reached up without thinking, her hand cupping his cheek, and he froze at the contact, every muscle going rigid. But he didn't pull away. I'm so happy, she whispered, almost shy. For so long I thought you couldn't stand the sight of me. Something in his expression shattered. His eyes closed, and the sound that escaped him was almost pained, like he was breaking from the inside out. She laughed, the sound breathless and joyful. "I'm going to be a mother." His eyes opened, and she saw everything in that gaze, the want, the need, and beneath it something that looked like devastation. But she was too happy to truly register it, too overwhelmed with relief and joy and gratitude. She kissed him, just a soft press of her lips to his, sweet and grateful and full of 7 years of longing she'd tried so hard to bury. "Thank you," she whispered against his mouth. "Thank you. Thank you." For one heartbeat, he remained perfectly still. Then his hand shot into her hair, fisting in the golden strands, and he kissed her back with desperate, consuming hunger that stole the breath from her lungs. Vivian gasped at the sudden intensity, and he swallowed the sound, his mouth claiming hers like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. It felt like 7 years of denied want finally breaking free, like a dam crumbling under impossible pressure. She arched into him, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle in his hair, and she laughed breathlessly because this was what she'd dreamed of. Her husband kissing her like she mattered, like she was wanted. Then his mouth left hers to trail down her jaw, hot and desperate, and she tilted her head to give him better access, her whole body singing with sensation. "Nathaniel," she breathed, and there was so much joy in saying his name like this, without distance, without formality. His mouth found her throat, his teeth scraping across her pulse point, sharp enough that the joy faltered slightly, replaced by a spike of sensation that was too intense, almost frightening in its power. She moaned his name, and he froze. For one heartbeat, neither of them moved.
No.
The word was barely audible, choked. "I'm sorry. I can't. I can't." Then he tore himself away with such violence that she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. But Vivian protested, reaching for him, her mind reeling. "You just said." "I know what I said." Nathaniel ran a trembling hand through his hair, backing toward the door. "And I meant it."
"Soon."
"But not tonight. Not like this." Only then did he look at her fully, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed through the chamber like a death knell. Vivian stood there alone, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her body still thrumming with need, her heart breaking all over again. What had just happened? 4 days later, Vivian stood outside Nathaniel's chambers, staring at the oak door that had remained closed for 4 days straight. For days since he'd kissed her like she was everything he'd ever wanted, then fled like she was poison. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," the guard said, shifting uncomfortably. "His Majesty has given strict orders. No one is to enter." "I'm his wife." Vivian kept her voice level, though frustration simmered beneath her careful composure. "Especially not you, Your Majesty." The guard had the decency to look apologetic. Those were his exact words. The words stung like a slap. After that night in her chambers, after he'd kissed her, promised her a child, looked at her like she was precious, he'd vanished, locked himself away, and refused to see anyone, especially her. "Is he ill?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts. "Has a healer seen him?" "The healers have tried, Your Majesty, but what?" The guard hesitated. "The king is not himself." Vivian's stomach clenched. Alpha shifters didn't get sick. Their constitutions were too strong, their healing too rapid. If Nathaniel was unwell enough that the healers couldn't help, perhaps speak with your sister, the guard suggested gently. "She's been consulting with the head healer." Dread pooled in Vivian's stomach as she hurried toward Isla's chambers. She found her sister surrounded by vials and herbs, her expression troubled, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept. "Isla." Vivian closed the door behind her. "Tell me what's happening." "No one will let me see my husband." Isla set down her pestle with a sigh. "He's been taking suppressants." "Excuse me?" "Suppressants. To dull the edge. The instinct." "I know what suppressants are." Vivian's mind raced. Suppressants were used to dampen a wolf's primal urges, to help them maintain control in situations where their animal nature might be dangerous. But Nathaniel had always been in perfect control. She'd never seen him lose even a fraction of his composure. Until 4 nights ago. He's been taking them for a while, Isla said quietly. A long while, apparently, and in significant quantities. How long? Isla met her eyes. The head healer says he's been requesting them regularly for years. The room tilted slightly. And you didn't tell me? I only just found out. Isla stood, crossing to Vivian. The healers came to me because they were desperate. He's been taking them for so long, in such high doses that what? That they're not working anymore. His body has built up too much tolerance. And now that he's stopped. He stopped. Vivian's voice rose. Why would he stop? Isla gave her a look. I think you know why. The kiss. The promise. The way he'd looked at her like she was everything. How much has he taken? Vivian asked. This can't be healthy. Extended use of suppressants can. I know. Isla pressed a small vial into Vivian's hands. That's why I made him something stronger. A dose that should actually work, help him through the worst of it. Vivian stared at the pale blue liquid. Then give it to him. The problem, Isla said carefully, is that no one can get close enough. He's barely verbal. Aggressive. The healers are afraid to enter his chambers. Then how? You. Isla squeezed her hands. You're his wife. His wolf will recognize you. Even in this state. You might be the only person he won't hurt. 4 days of him suffering, refusing help because he was too proud or too stubborn or too afraid of what might happen if he lost control. I'll do it, Vivian said. The guards moved aside as Vivian approached Nathaniel's chambers again, the vial clutched in her hand. I'm acting on the healer's orders, she announced. Open the door. They obeyed. The first thing Vivian noticed was the heat, oppressive, stifling, the kind that steals air from your lungs and leaves your skin tingling. The second thing was Nathaniel's scent. It wrapped around her like smoke, so intense it made her wolf surge forward with desperate need. Her mouth went dry as she stepped into the darkness. Nathaniel stood at the window with his back to her, shirtless, his skin gleaming with sweat. He looked carved from heat and held together by will alone. The sight of his bare back, the breadth of him, tugged at something deep and primal in her chest. Your Majesty, she murmured. He turned slowly, and Vivian's breath caught. His eyes were pure gold. Not a trace of silver remained. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, muscles coiled tight like he was fighting every instinct in his body. Leave. The word came out rough, barely human.
No.
Vivian held up the vial, keeping her voice steady even as her heart hammered. Isla made this for you. It will help. I said leave. He took a step toward her, and she saw the tremor in his hands, the way he was barely holding himself together. Vivian, please. I can't if I hurt you. You won't hurt me. She moved closer, closing the distance between them despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain space. I'm your wife. Your mate. You would never hurt me. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating off his skin. Tell me why you've been taking suppressants for 7 years. Tell me why you've kept me at arm's length when I can see that you want me. His jaw clenched so hard, she heard his teeth grind. Because I'm cursed. The words hung in the air between them.
What?
Vivian whispered. Nathaniel turned away, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion and defeat. Before we married, my brother cast a curse on me. He was supposed to be king, but our father chose me instead. So he cursed me. If I ever claim my true mate, if I ever consummate our bond, I'll die. The room spun. Vivian reached for the wall to steady herself. That's why, he continued, his voice hollow. That's why I've kept my distance. Why I took the suppressants. To dull the instinct, to make it bearable. Because every moment near you is agony. Every time you look at me, every time you speak my name, my wolf howls for you. But claiming you means death. Why didn't you tell me? Tears streamed down her face. Why did you let me think you didn't want me? He turned back to her, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke her. Because telling you would have made it real. Would have made this. He gestured between them. Impossible to resist. At least with your anger, your hurt, I had something to hold on to. A reason to stay away. But the other night, Vivian said, understanding dawning. You promised me a child. I found someone. Nathaniel's voice was barely audible. A witch who might be able to break the curse. She arrives in 2 days. If she succeeds, his voice cracked. If she succeeds, then I can finally give you everything. But until then you need this. Vivian held up the vial again, her hands shaking. Let me help you, please. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. She approached slowly, like he was a wild animal that might bolt. When she reached him, she uncorked the vial and lifted it to his lips. Drink. He obeyed, his eyes never leaving hers as he swallowed the pale blue liquid. His throat worked, and Vivian found herself mesmerized by the movement, by his closeness, by everything she'd been denied for so long. There, she whispered when the vial was empty. That should help. But Nathaniel caught her wrist before she could pull away, his grip gentle despite the tremor running through him. Vivian, I need you to understand something.
What?
I've wanted you since the moment I saw you. Every day of these 7 years has been torture. Every night I've lain awake knowing you were just down the hall, wondering what it would be like to hold you, to make you mine. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, and she shivered. The suppressants weren't just for control. They were for survival. Because without them, I would have broken. I would have claimed you despite the curse, despite knowing it would kill me. Nathaniel. You deserve to know, he interrupted. You deserve to know that you've been wanted.
Desperately. Completely.
Every single day. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. 2 days. The witch arrives in 2 days. 2 days, he confirmed. Then softer. Can you forgive me? For the pain I've caused you. Vivian cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. There's nothing to forgive. You were trying to survive. We both were. The suppressant was starting to work. She could see it in the way some of the tension eased from his shoulders, the way his breathing began to slow. But his eyes still burned with that fierce, desperate want. You should go, he said, though his hands came up to cover hers, holding them against his face like he couldn't bear to let her leave. 2 days, Vivian repeated firmly. We've survived 7 years. We can survive 2 more days. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, then forced herself to step back, to walk toward the door. Every step felt like tearing her own heart out, but she did it anyway. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Nathaniel stood where she'd left him, looking lost and lonely and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I love you, she said softly. I think I've loved you since the day we married. And in 2 days, when that curse is broken, I'm going to show you exactly how much. His sharp inhale was the last sound she heard before she closed the door between them. 2 days had never felt so long. Vivian stood outside the throne room where Nathaniel was meeting with the witch, an ancient woman named Morgana who'd traveled from the northern wastes. Isla stood beside her, squeezing her hand so tight it hurt. What if it doesn't work? Vivian whispered. It will work, Isla said fiercely. It has to. The doors opened and Nathaniel emerged. For one heart-stopping moment, Vivian couldn't read his expression. Then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and she knew. It's broken, he said simply. Vivian didn't remember moving. One moment she was standing by the door, the next she was in his arms, and he was lifting her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. It's really broken? She asked between kisses pressed to his face, his jaw, anywhere she could reach. You're sure? I'm sure. He set her down but didn't let her go, his arms a solid band around her waist. The curse is gone. I'm free. We're free. Around them, the court had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Vivian saw the whispers starting, the shocked faces, but she didn't care. For once, she didn't care what anyone thought. "I love you," Nathaniel said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've loved you for 7 years, and I'm done hiding it. Done pretending. You're mine, Vivian. My wife. My mate. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for the time I've wasted." Then he kissed her, right there in front of the entire court, a claiming kiss that left no doubt in anyone's mind about how he felt about his queen. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian was distantly aware of Islaw cheering, of the court erupting in shocked whispers and excited chatter. But all she could focus on was Nathaniel, the way he was looking at her like she was his entire world. "Take me to bed," she whispered against his lips.
Please.
"I've waited long enough." His growl of approval sent shivers down her spine. Then he was lifting her into his arms, carrying her through the corridors while servants scattered and courtiers stared. Vivian buried her face in his neck, breathing in assent, finally allowing herself to believe this was real. Nathaniel's chambers were exactly as she remembered from that night weeks ago, but everything felt different now. He set her down gently, his hands immediately going to her face, tilting it up so he could look at her. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "We can wait if you—" "I've waited 7 years," Vivian interrupted, already reaching for the laces of her gown. "I'm not waiting another moment." The dress pooled at her feet, and Nathaniel's sharp inhale made heat bloom across her skin. His eyes had gone gold again, but this time there was no curse holding him back, no reason to fight what they both wanted. "You're beautiful," he breathed. "Gods, Vivian. You're perfect." Then his mouth was on hers again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. His hands roamed over her body like he was memorizing every curve, every dip, every place that made her gasp. They tumbled onto the bed together, a tangle of limbs and desperate kisses, and 7 years of denied want finally breaking free. When he finally claimed her, when they finally became one, Vivian cried out, not from pain but from the overwhelming rightness of it, the sense of completion she'd craved for so long. "Mine," Nathaniel growled against her throat.
Mine. Mine.
"Mine." "Yours," she agreed breathlessly. "Always yours." Later, much later, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Nathaniel's hand resting possessively on her stomach. "I'm going to keep you here for a week," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Maybe a month. The kingdom can survive without us for a while." Vivian laughed, the sound light and joyful. "They'll talk. Let them talk." He pulled her closer. "I've wasted 7 years caring what people think. Never again." She turned in his arms to face him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Do you think it worked? Could we have made a baby?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But we have plenty of time to try. And trust me," his smile turned wicked, "I plan to try very, very often." Heat flushed through her body. "Is that a promise, Your Majesty?" "It's a vow." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a kiss full of love and promise and hope for all the tomorrows they'd almost lost. "You're going to be a mother, Vivian. I'm going to give you everything you've ever wanted. All the children you can dream of. All the love you deserve. I promise you." And as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, finally where she belonged, Vivian believed him. The nursery was no longer empty. Vivian stood in the doorway, watching Nathaniel rock their daughter in his arms. Little Elena had his dark hair and her golden eyes, and she'd wrapped both of them completely around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "Is she asleep?" Vivian whispered. Nathaniel looked up with a smile that still made her heart flutter. "Almost. She's fighting it." Vivian crossed the room and peered down at their daughter's face. Elena's eyes were drooping, her tiny fist clutching Nathaniel's shirt as she fought to stay awake. "She has your stubbornness," Nathaniel observed. "Mine." Vivian laughed softly. "You're the one who stood outside the healer's room pacing for 12 hours during the birth." 13 hours, he corrected. "Longest 13 hours of my life." Elena finally surrendered to sleep, her breathing evening out. Nathaniel carefully placed her in the crib they'd commissioned, carved from oak with wolves and roses, a perfect blend of both their families. As they stood together watching their daughter sleep, Nathaniel's arms came around Vivian's waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what? For not giving up on us. For waiting. For loving me even when I gave you every reason not to." Vivian turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. "You're my mate, Nathaniel. My husband. My love. There was never any other choice." He kissed her softly, tenderly, a kiss that promised forever. "We should probably let her sleep," Vivian whispered against his lips. "The healers said new mothers need rest." "The healers," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a deeper tone, "also said we should wait 6 weeks before trying for another child." "It's been 6 weeks." His smile turned predatory. "I know." Heat flooded through Vivian's body as he swept her into his arms. "Nathaniel, you'll wake her. She's a sound sleeper," he assured her, already carrying her toward the door. "Takes after her mother that way." Their laughter echoed through the hallways as he carried her back to their chambers, not his or hers anymore, but theirs, shared and full of love. And later, much later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Vivian pressed a hand to her stomach and smiled. She'd waited 7 years for happiness. 7 years for love. 7 years for a family of her own. It had been worth every moment. If you enjoyed this video, kindly subscribe to this channel. Also, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comment section. Also, tap this video showing on your screen to see what happened in this werewolf fantasy story.